afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? My name is Sam Mahone, Chairman. I serve as chair of the Americus Sumter County Movement Remember Committee, a committee that is dedicated to the preservation of the history of the Americus Sumter County Movement. Tonight's forum, symposium, is to commemorate specifically the 50th anniversary of the American Civil Rights Movement. It's quite fitting that we do that it's happening at this time. It's also the anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington. It's the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It is also the 50th anniversary of the passing of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, noted scholar, civil rights activist. We welcome you here. I would like to ask everyone to please turn off your cell phones at this time if you have them on.
Excuse me, Sam. Is there a way that a humble parish priest might plug one in?
John Hudson will take care of that.
Okay, we'll just share one here.
Okay.
Although we have been known to speak at the same time.
What we've done with this panel, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring together some of the activists who were at the focal point of that movement. And we're focusing primarily on a couple of historic cases, legal cases that happened here. One had to do with the striking down of the sedition law that was in place at that time, which was punishable by death when 4 civil rights workers were arrested and placed in jail here. One of those persons is on the panel here, John Perdue. And also, the other case involved 4 women whose action was nonetheless historic as Rosa Parks decided not to give up her seat on that bus in Montgomery. They were arrested for trying to vote in the white-only voting line at the Sumter County Courthouse. For that, they were arrested and placed in jail. The charge was later ruled unconstitutional, and you'll hear the results of that. Before we begin that, I'd like to, first of all, introduce you to Chris Barr, who is a National Park Service at Andersonville guide. And Chris is going to open this up because Andersonville is just down the road from here, and a lot of us are not familiar with the history of Andersonville in terms of how it relates to what role that African Americans play there, the fact that there were African American prisoners of war there in that camp as well. At some point later on, we're going to be creating more dialogue with the National Park Service in terms of how we can bring all these entities together, entities like the Andersonville Cemetery, Cornelia Farm, and what have you, in relation to how it all impacted the civil rights movement here in Americus. So I'd like to, Chris is a graduate of Georgia Southwestern here, the degree in history and a master's in history from Columbia State University. Prior to joining the Park Service, he was a teacher in the Sumter County school system, which he continues to work with by helping the student internship program with the National Park Service. Currently, he is working on a project entitled The High Watermark of Slavery, Andersonville as a Site of Slave Resistance and Emancipationist Memory. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Barr.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're gathered to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement here in Americus and Sumter County. Many of you in this room fought against the status quo and pursued the equality and civic freedoms that had been denied to you over the years. In many ways, this movement was successful. Is racism and prejudice dead? Of course not. However, our schools were integrated, including my alma mater, Americus High School. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 68, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the 24th Amendment, as well as some of the other cases that were just mentioned, helped secure legal rights for all Americans. Today, our congressional representative, Sanford Bishop, is an African American, and President Obama carried the vote in Sumter County in both 2008 and 2012. things that must have seemed unimaginable in the turbulence of 1963. But what seemed only unimaginable in 1963 would have seemed impossible in 1863. The Civil War that had divided our nation for 2 long years was at a turning point. The Emancipation Proclamation became official on January 1st of that year. Although intended as a war measure to hasten the end of the conflict, it served as a rallying cry for black communities and Northern abolitionists and made the Union Army, albeit reluctantly at times, an agent of emancipation as it moved through the South. It paved the way for the recruitment of approximately 180,000 African Americans into the armed forces. In July 1863, almost 100 years to the day before some of you were arrested and incarcerated in the Leesburg Stockade, the all-black 54th Massachusetts Infantry made its assault on Fort Wagner near Charleston, famously depicted in the movie Glory. In that same month, Confederate armies were defeated at Gettysburg and Vicksburg. In November, President Lincoln talked about a new birth of freedom and the restoration of the Union, and people began to wonder that the war might be coming to a close and pondered, what would this all mean? For the black community throughout the South, that meant freedom, the end of slavery. They did not care why southern states opted to secede or why President Lincoln pursued emancipation as a means to stop secession. They did not care about why any individual soldier was personally motivated to enlist, and they're not concerned about what percentage of Southerners actually owned slaves. They simply knew that if the Confederate Army was victorious, that the status quo would be maintained and that they would remain enslaved. They were not neutral observers in this conflict. Rather, they were party to its outcome, and they began to act on that. Anywhere Union armies advanced in the South, slaves approached and offered assistance, providing key military information, serving as scouts, cooks, wagon drivers, and even enlisting as soldiers and sailors. Slaves, far from the battlefields, began to resist by other means. They'd slow down their work or refuse to work at all. In plantations where the men were off to war, in some cases, slaves literally took over the plantation by force. As more slaves began to escape or resist, the Confederate States were forced to divert desperately needed resources, including men and material, from the war effort in order to maintain domestic tranquility. Your fight in 1963 had its roots in 1863. But what about our small community here? Most of us in this room are familiar with the magnitude of the movement in the 1960s. Americus received a lot of attention nationally. John Lewis, in his speech at the March on Washington 50 years ago this week, even directly mentioned the struggles here in Americus by name. Dr. King was jailed here. But what about the 1860s? What was happening here, and who were the forebears of this struggle? Sumter County in 1864 was home to Andersonville Prison, the largest of the military prisons during the Civil War. Approximately 45,000 Union soldiers were held captive, including African Americans, in an open stockade just 10 miles up the road. Just fewer than 13,000 of them died in captivity, making Andersonville the deadliest site of the Civil War. As many as 5,000 Confederate soldiers were stationed here on staff as well. But there were also hundreds of slaves working at the site, impressed into labor by the Confederate Army, and hundreds more living in and around nearby plantations. They fought for an outcome that would ensure their own freedom by interacting with the prison in a way that would assist the Union soldiers, whom they saw as their liberators, and hurt the Confederacy. Slaves who were assigned to work at the prison, like Tynes Kendrick or Floyd Snelson, might smuggle food and supplies into the prisoners. Prisoner George Tibbles later testified that, quote, "The knife given me by the old Negro blacksmith at Andersonville was of the greatest service in assisting us in our escape. During this tedious journey, the Negroes along the route were always our friends, and when they were satisfied that we were Yankee prisoners, they often risked their lives to aid us, and always shared with us their scanty food. They risked their lives because their own freedom hung in the balance." Prisoner William Tyler described that during his attempted escape, a slave named Jake and his mother hid him in their simple cabin. Jake then led Confederate soldiers on a wild goose chase throughout the county, while his mother helped Tyler engage with the Underground Railroad as a means of escape, although he was eventually tracked down by bloodhounds, another common experience of the Underground Railroad. After the war, the American Missionary Association established a freedmen's school in the old prison hospital. Floyd Snelson went to Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta, and he became the Reverend Floyd Snelson. He led Emancipation Day services in the Andersonville Cemetery on January 1st, 1869, and Andersonville became a gathering place for the black community. A newspaper from Connecticut described the scene in January 1866. A few blacks live in the neighborhood, and some of these gathered around, and with tears streaming down their cheeks, testified to the depth of their affection for those whom they esteemed as their deliverers. "Poor Yanks," said they, "our dead were as precious relics, and with streaming eyes and wailing lamentation showed with what veneration and love they looked upon the mortal remains of those through whose sufferings and death a race rose up from chains." By the 1880s and the 1890s, as many as 10,000 African Americans were visiting Andersonville every Memorial Day to celebrate their own freedom by honoring the soldiers that gave their lives in the conflict that secured it. The rise of Jim Crow in the early 20th century eventually drove African Americans away from Andersonville. What had been a site of celebration and freedom became segregated, ushering in the era into which many of you were born and fought to overcome. So today, as we commemorate the actions of heroes like Reverend Campbell, many of you in this room, Roberta Freeman and the students who desegregated Americus High, the stolen girls of the Leesburg Stockade 50 years ago, let us also remember the heroics of those in our community who struggled towards that same goal 150 years ago. Let us not forget men like Reverend Floyd Snelson, Tynes Kendrick, Jake and his mother, or that anonymous blacksmith, or the more than 180,000 black men who served their country, or the countless slaves who took matters into their own hands and fought to overcome the status quo by any means necessary. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kendall Blanchard, President of Georgia Southwestern State University.
Thank you. Let me first say welcome to all of you to Georgia Southwestern State University and this America's Civil Rights Symposium. Georgia Southwestern is over 100 years old. It has witnessed the major economic, social, and political changes that have swept the South in general, and Americus in particular during that time. Perhaps the most dramatic and important of these changes was desegregation and the events that unfolded in the wake of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. While there are elements of our institution's legacy of which we cannot be proud, I am pleased to note that much has changed on our campus. The first African-American student was admitted to Georgia Southwestern College in 1965. Now approximately 30% of our student body is African-American. This group includes campus leaders, some of our brightest and most serious students, outstanding athletes, and many service-minded young adults. I believe our African-American students are the key to the future of Southwest Georgia. Their success is critical to the success of the region. Our charge is to teach them, challenge them, and do all we can to help them achieve their dream. I cannot imagine anything we do here at Georgia Southwestern that is more important. For that reason, we are pleased that you have chosen to come here for this symposium, this recognition of 50 years of major social change in Americus. This is both a time of celebration and a time to be reminded that there are still many challenges we as Americans face as we continue learning how to live with each other. So again, welcome. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Susan Bragg, who will put this symposium into perspective and introduce the participants. Dr. Bragg is an assistant professor of history here at Georgia Southwestern. A native of California, she received her undergraduate and master's degrees at Cal State Sacramento and later earned her PhD at the University of Washington. She held teaching positions in New York, Utah, and Washington before coming to Southwestern in 2010. Professor Bragg teaches, does research, and publishes in several areas, but principally in African American and women's studies. Most recently, she has been researching the role of African women as activists and agents of social change. She is frequently invited to make speeches, talk show appearances, and formal presentations at professional meetings. So with that, let me introduce historian, author, and professor, Dr. Susan Bragg.
Hello, everyone. It is such a huge honor to be part of this event today. And I want to give a special welcome from the History and Political Science Department. And not only on behalf of our department, but also we have Dr. Isaacs here, who was the first faculty member to teach African American history on our campus. So I want to recognize that he is here as well. I'm very also pleased to note that many of my students are in attendance, and I look forward to talking with them more about the lessons that they have learned from these experiences. So if you are here, congratulations, good job. One of the things that I think is so important is to be able to see models of activism, people who made change happen, and of course you are following in their footsteps. And so I hope you will find this program exciting, but I also hope you will get the chance to talk to people individually as well, and to make those kinds of connections and to learn more as we go. Now, my official role here is to introduce Reverend William Moses Howard Jr., who has a career that we can certainly all respect and appreciate and learn from. He's going to be at the heart of this program here, helping to get things underway. And he is somebody who has combined faith activism and commitment to social change throughout his life and career. He has a very impressive resume. He began as a young activist here in this region, and he was at the heart of the Sumter County Voters League, helping to organize voter registration in the early 1960s. And he took that activism to the global stage and was active in peace dialogues across the world. His faith activism has led him into the World Council of Churches, and he's traveled to South Africa, to the Middle East, to Latin America, to parts of Asia, and so he has had a very diverse career that really stemmed from this history of this region, as I understand, and I think, again, there's something that we're going to learn a lot more about as we go here. He also helped to create programs in social work and in urban education at the New York Theological Seminary. So this has been a long, proud career that is impressive. And he is currently a minister at the Bethany Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey. So we want to welcome him back to Americus, and we look forward very much to the stories that we're going to hear from the panel here and then from all of you in the audience as well. Thank you all for being here, and thank the panel for being here very much.
Or you have your own mic, as you should have. Amen. Sitting next to a legend here. Actually, I'm sitting at a table with legends. And having said that, I'll just introduce myself as the kid on the block. Can we say that? Okay, good. It's always a risky thing for me to come home to do something like this, because sitting before me, and Professor, I want to say, Google me and read all the bad stuff. Thank you for sorting through that, huh? But I'm at home, and I'm going to behave as if I am at home, if that's all right.
Help yourself.
And I want my cousins and my extended family to excuse me for not acknowledging everyone, because we will be here literally all day. I'm going to take the liberty, because my good friend of a lifetime has brought me here and hasn't given me any instructions, so I can say a few things.
That's true.
I envision this college, and Mr. President, I want to thank you and the college for hosting this, but I'm going to be bold and say something for which no one else shares responsibility, just Bill Howard. We all have a past, institutions, individuals, talking like a preacher, right? My fellow theological graduate. But maybe the heritage of this college puts it in a special position to do what I think is urgently needed at this moment, a half century later. and Mr. Barr, you were excellent. I'm reading for the second time The Warmth of Other Suns. I was blessed to ride here on the plane from Atlanta with a young man who grew up in South Carolina. And he was telling me, without really knowing who I was, how he was passionately committed to working in the South. Black man, rearing his children in the South. And Isabel has written a masterpiece that speaks about the bitter past. The truth is, it's mainly about the migration from the South, but as Malcolm X said it so eloquently, if you were south of the Canadian border, you were south.
You're right. I agree.
But America is a country with a lot of warts and a lot of promise. And if we're going to get stuck, and we must never move forward uncritically, but we cannot allow our critique to let us remain stuck in a past that we allowed to happen until we woke up. And so I'm envisioning this wart-laden institution as an academic center for the preservation, the study, and the exhibition of the Americus component of the Southwest Georgia movement. I think it is an asset. I think young people from all over the country, scholars, will find a path to this place if Georgia Southwestern two-year college, now State University, were to intentionally take this on and embrace it, Mr. President. I think this is a vital part of the American story. And as far as the Negro is concerned, it's second only to the Great Migration, which is, in truth, the most important social movement to ever take place in America after the Civil War. When people, as Isabel writes, didn't even have a leader, but they were fed up with the cruel, inhumane punishment they experienced at the hand of landowners and in the presence of the silence of poor white people who shared their stake in so many ways. They walked, they left, they went. And so I think this is a propitious moment, and Sam has heard me talk about, I talk about this a lot, because I think as time passes on, we need institutional support for this preservation.
That's true.
You know, after a while, the Charles Sherrods and the John Perdues will not be with us. You know, 50 years from now, we could probably assume none of us will be around. Who will preserve this legacy? And I'd say the academic community, with all of its warts and all of the trickery that can go down. There's nothing more political than the academic community.
That's so true.
But I think some kind of partnership with a local support group, maybe holding certain kinds of legal ownership of this heritage, but in partnership with this institution, is a marvelous thing. Now, Mayor Dinkins, my good friend, first black mayor of New York, he used to tell this joke to the point that we actually cringed. He told it so much, but he told a story about how a guy from the Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood died in the flood, and he went to heaven. And that was a famous flood. Not only the second one, but I mean the first one. Lots of people were killed, and he presumed that people in heaven certainly knew about it, and he went around heaven bragging. You know, I died in the Johnstown flood. And the guy came up to him and pulled his coattail. He said, my friend, he said, that's fine. He said, but don't forget, Noah is up here. So I say, I'm honored to be on this panel. I'm going to be quiet now and facilitate, because the Noahs of our movement are represented here today. They're not all here, but many of the giants who didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring. They just knew that today was untenable. Have you seen The Butler? A lot of people are going to trash The Butler. But one thing The Butler did was it showed the risk-taking young people before they had a mortgage. That's what makes you liberal. See, a radical is a mortgage holder with 2 children. But these young people in Americus and the 5-county region actually often convinced until they were totally out of their minds, Sister Shirley, by the likes of Charles Sherrod and Prathia Hall. There was fear to be had, but often after a few good freedom songs and a few lies by Prathia and Sherrod, I said lies because they say, without fear we could accomplish anything. And around us were these guys in the pickup trucks somewhere way out in Lee County in the dark, and we believed them. John Perdue is in the house, my Lord. So, and I'm sitting next to Sister Campbell, who with her husband put it all on the line. So it is with this understanding that I present to you these extraordinary people. I'm happy to see all of you here. I hope the reason why you're here is because you're genuinely interested in a critical examination, not only for the sake of knowing what has transpired, but as a glimpse into where we are now and where we must go.
That's right.
I can tell you the one thing that has not changed. There's still a bunch of people in America who have the illusion that they do not share the plight of marginalized people because of the color of their skin. I think this is another ministry in this area. So many white people without land, so many white people without possession, and rather than joining a progressive movement to include all Americans, they joined a Tea Party to take a country back that was never theirs. Now, each of these persons has something to say. They're going to open with a brief statement, and then we're going to expect them to entertain, after we have heard from them all, your questions, your comment, your engagement. Is that a fair plan? How long do we have? What's the perimeter here? Hello? Huh? We're going to end at what time? We're going to end at what time? It's 10 minutes to 2.
Well, we got started late, so we want to end about 3 o'clock, but let's say about 3:30.
3:30. Now, when I tell them to shut up and turn the mic off, don't get mad at me. I just want it to be said. Now, I'm going to start with my contemporary, my friend, and she's listed here as Mary Kate Tyner, and I'm going to call her Mary Kate Fish. The Queen Mother. If you would. your opening statement.
Well, good afternoon, and it is so good for me to be here. It is a joy to be here and to see all of you. At the time all of this was happening, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that it would come to this. Mm-hmm. And never did I think that the things that I did were that important. Mm-hmm. I did them because I believed in them. And that particular day that I did a certain thing, I was angry. Mm-hmm. I was more angry than anything else. And you were looking at somebody who didn't want to go to jail. Mm-hmm. But I was willing to do anything that I had to do the things that I believed in. And I'll leave it with that.
Mm. Wow. Oh, man. That was not a preacher's speech, to be sure. Now, I'm going to go to Lena Turner Fulton. And I'm assuming that you're reading their brief, very brief bios on your paper. Am I correct? Right. This is a literate crowd, and I'm not going to repeat that. There's a lot more to be known about these people. This is just a little snippet, and I'm going to ask Lena if she would share with us in whatever way she sees fit.
Thank you. Looking briefly at the comments about me, they said that we collectively have 9 children. Now, what a beautiful family that would be. But the truth of it is, it's 5 children. So before I get those phone calls tonight, 5 children. And, you know, it's very interesting not ever imagining, as Mary Kate said, ever being in this place on this day. It certainly was the farthest thing from any of our minds. Mm-hmm. What I felt and knew is that there was not anybody any better than I. I had a wonderful mother and grandmother who taught that from birth. If they can drink out of that fountain, so can you. The encouragement began at birth. And at no time did I ever feel that I didn't belong to a struggle. You know, I would be in bed at night and hear them talk about it. They didn't know the next step to take. And when those people came to this town, those outside agitators, the John Perdue's, the Don Harris, I knew there was a way. I knew there was a possibility. So it was everything I wanted, and I thank you. I thank you very much. And then the Warren Fortsons of the world who were local and was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. I thank them. You know, there's so much to say, and I know there isn't time. Plus, you got to remember, it's been 50 plus years, and old Father Time played tricks on the mind. So I'm going to expect a little help as we go along with this. Thank you.
You know, any kid growing up in America is impressed with the class strata in the black community would have thought that somehow Campbell Chapel would be the center of our uprising. Instead, it was at an AME church on the north end of town. The Campbells are legendary. And you know, Sister Campbell, I'm going to say this. You know, AME preachers are sent to a place. And, you know, depending on the annual conference, in a hot minute, they could be sent somewhere else. But, you know, it is really quite impressive when a person who is essentially itinerant in their career digs down deep and plants such incredible roots and is an integral part of the heritage for all time of Americus, Georgia, and the struggle for freedom. And Sister Campbell, I want you to talk like a preacher now. These people are, I don't know how they're talking. Lay it out there.
My friends, and I say my friends because practically all of you in here have known me, let me say, a long time, because I'm the wife of J.R. Campbell, who's the preacher that he was talking about that came down here. Why am I saying it that way? Because I'm thinking back to what a favorite Bible verse of his. I must do the works of him that sent me
while it is day. Nights coming to, and when no man can work. Well, you see, when he was sent from where we were to here, we had no idea that there was going to be any more work except one thing, and I think I was the most curious one of all. We were watching the progress of the movement in the other states as it worked right around here in Georgia and what we were doing. And coming to Americus, I became proud of us here for more than one or two things. First thing, I know somebody's saying right now, why in the world should move from that seat in the corner over here? I moved from that because there was another one of us that was sitting right here whose spirit is here now. Somebody's going to say, what are you talking about? Do you remember a girl by the name of Gloria Wiseman? Oh, yeah. Well, now, are you following me now? Gloria's spirit is sitting right here now wondering, what in the world would I say to what he has to say right here? Your spirits all became involved. How did that happen? It happened because we know that Jesus said that, lo, I'm with you even until the end of the age, and the age hadn't come yet for us. Somebody say, how'd that happen? I'm still here, and these three girls are still here, and he's still here. So for us, going all the way up to, as he said, a half a century later, we are going to get a chance to see what in the world his plan was for Americas and the United States as a whole. I was among the group. I was able to do one thing. I went into the field of education because I was one of the elementary teachers here. So I had a chance to look and to see some of the things that we needed as parents and as students to do what? To get our children better educated and better fitted to go ahead in the work world as they are supposed to do. So I became interested to see what we're going to do to improve with the books, with the lessons. Remember, they had a hand. The trouble was we don't have any money, and we didn't ever have any money when it come down to what we were going to do until we found out that he was with us and we didn't have no right to be afraid. And we stepped out on our own, and the three of us and the others consolidated together collectively to do what little or what more we could do to help the movement succeed under the direction with Reverend Campbell and the rest of the men that were working tirelessly to make this a success here. I'm proud of the fact that I was a part of it. I'm proud. I didn't want to go to jail. I don't think either of us wanted to go to jail. But when the deputy chef informed me that I was standing into a woman's line, and I swallowed. I said, but what am I but a woman? And God gave us a job to do just like he gave the men, didn't he? And when I say that, now, are you wondering why I said that? Because this is going to be audience participation, isn't it? Because the women out there are going to say they're women. And to turn around to try you out for being a woman and ask you what you're doing in a woman's line, which a little later on, I suppose you'll find out why we're saying that and how it mobilized us. It immobilized you. Because some of you all put those brooms down on the top of the porch and got in that line and went walking toward the courthouse. The thing that I'm going to say, what we did, we were doing as representatives of what you wanted to do, but they called us, and we did that to the best of our ability, and you'll hear more about that later. Amen.
Greg Whitcamper, a very interesting life. Can't imagine what it was like for you to be in Americus High School. But just a word about Koinonia. I have two very vivid memories as a child. One, very, very warm and affirming. Thelma Barnum, you know that name, was my Cub Scout leader. And she took us to Koinonia to learn how to learn archery. Now, we were all accustomed to bows and arrows. We made our own. And we went to hear that there was something called archery. Very interesting experience. But the other was lying in my bed on Oglethorpe Avenue and hearing and feeling the tremor of the bomb that blew up the feed store on the corner of, what is that, Lee Street and Forsyth. I dare say you have a memory of those days, but I welcome you now to share in whatever way you want.
I'm really honored. I didn't do anything. I got born into a situation. My parents moved to Quintanilla, and I've just kind of been in the groove with it. Woody Allen once said, when they asked him why he was successful, he said, well, 90% of it is showing up. And that's basically what I've done, is I've showed up at the farm because my parents took me there. And I don't know how much everybody knows about Quintanilla. I'm sure everybody knows a lot. But it's a big story. And where I come involved was when I went to the high school. There were 6 of us from Quintanilla that went there. And we all got treated terribly, to put it lightly. So I can't tell you all my stories, like it says in the introduction. I'm working on a book, and I hope that the book will be enlightening to you to some degree. I mean, it's been an interesting life, and I'm really honored to be here, and hope to answer any questions that anybody would have about the different experiences we had.
Thank you. I don't mean to sound hyperbolic, but I'll say that in the next speaker's voice, you will hear the voice of a living legend. Mr. Sherrod, would you speak, please?
Let me take these glasses off where I can see. I had to write a few notes, so I won't wander too long on your time. This is a great day, the second march on Washington. The first 50 years ago was for jobs and freedom. It turned out to be to support the administration's civil rights bill. John Lewis put Americus in the spotlight when he said, what about the 3 young men, SNCC field secretaries in Americus, Georgia, who faced the death penalty for engaging in peaceful protest? We shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and put them back together in the image of God and democracy. He challenged the people to go back to Georgia and to the South and get into the streets. The people from Americus heard the message and continued the demonstrations all that summer. Children were arrested and beaten. James Williams' leg was broken. One man was shot in the back, in the neck. People were whipped with billy clubs. People were attacked with cattle prods, leaving burns of flesh wounds. Ralph Allen, John Perdue, Don Harris, another fellow whose name I couldn't think of, was in prison. Whose name? Zev Eleni was in prison for 3 months, charged with inciting insurrection, with punishment of death. People were attacked, and despite documents of wounds, stitches, bleeding, hospital records, the FBI declared that they couldn't find any abuse of power. We find ourselves in the same situation, my brothers and sisters. We have another march in Washington. but we got to march in Americus. Because they're trying to take our vote away again. They're trying to take our other rights away again, and it's black and white. If we could only understand that if white people could just wake up and see that when they do some underhanded thing to black people, they do the same underhanded thing to white people. When they mess with the rules on welfare and take the money away, they do that to black and white. And somehow we've got to, if all the white folk who are catching hell, there's a lot of white folk catching hell.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Could wise up and see that we black folk know we catching hell. We've got to realize that we're in this ship together. And let's work together. Thank you very much.
Excellent, 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 excellent. Now, in 1963, I mean, my insanity was fully exposed because I applied to one college, John. One college. I guess I was so full of myself that I figured when they got my letter, they would say, wow, Howard has written, let's let him in. 1963, I went to Morehouse College, and I thought I was on the top of the world. And a lot of people felt that way about Harvard in 1963. They were trying to run to Harvard, and John was leaving Harvard. This is a little confusing, John. But listen, I was by that time of the insurrection trial already in Atlanta, read everything they could print about it, and was always inquiring. But a great admirer of yours, Ralph Allen, ate many a collard green at my grandmother's table. But, and of course, John we knew very well. But let me say, I knew you were a serious brother, though. Not after all of that. But when you married Amanda Bowens, I said, that guy got some sense. Anyway, and brother, it's good to meet you, good to be on the same platform with you, and please share with us in whatever way you see fit.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure, really, to be among all of these friends. And the central theme here is guts, to put it bluntly. Greg did more than showing up, I'll tell you. Showing up at school and surviving and coping with the daily terrorism that he and his and the other koinonia of people were subjected to. One of the most moving things I've ever experienced in my life was when I was visiting, my wife and I were visiting Millard Fuller at the Fuller Center of Housing right over here. And he read some of the letters that had been written to Greg at long last from his erstwhile classmates. And I remember that when they finally broke their silence and said what a great guy he was and how brave he was and how he was a hero of theirs even when they were brutalizing him. So, my brother, you did a lot more than show up. Now, Sherrod had a lot of guts to show up in Southwest Georgia, in Albany, and say, well, let's have a movement. I wish I'd been a fly on the wall to see that. He broke that silence. It took a lot of guts, and he went through a lot of turmoil as a price for it. It was very dangerous then to to stand up and say you were for civil rights, whether you were white or black, rich or poor, north or south. It took a lot of guts. And it still takes guts to stand up against speak truth to power, if you will, today. The racism is not as blatant and crude now as it used to be. It's a lot slicker. They don't say, we're going to prevent black people from voting because they shouldn't vote. We're just going to require voter IDs and make it harder to vote in advance and shorten the hours and make it harder to find the polling place and so forth in black areas, by the way. We need a movement today. We need one. We have one. We have the beginnings of, there are people demonstrating and going to jail in North Carolina, in California, all over the place. The issues are a little different, the battlefields are a little different, but the issue is the same. We need to have a government that represents the people and the needs of and does something about the needs of the people, of all the people, rather than just a very wealthy few. So I'm honored to be here with these brave friends. You know, from the perspective of 2013, it might seem as though the changes that we saw, the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of '65, and so forth, and all the changes that we've all seen and read about in the books, those might have seemed inevitable, you know, from the perspective of afterwards. But I'll tell you, when we were marching and going to jail and getting beaten up in '63, '62, '64, and so forth, it didn't seem inevitable at all. After all, the powers of Jim Crow had been in control for nearly 100 years at that point, and preceding that, of course, the long period of slavery. So it didn't seem inevitable at all. And they had all the guns, they had all the power, they had all the laws, the courts, and so forth. But a few people, a few thousand people, a few thousand ordinary people can change things, and we can do the same thing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I made a reference when I spoke to the president about fellow theological graduate. So our president, in fact, is theologically trained and is very familiar with the culture of the church. And I can say that in the Bethany Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey on Sunday morning, I'm as free as I ever get in this life. I can get up and say anything I want to and have at least half of the church is completely going crazy in agreement. And the rest of them sort of agree, you know? But I often think, what is it like for a progressive-minded pastor in an exceedingly invested community of power brokers who wants to speak the truth and have the truth spoken with consequences? If he wants to be useful, productive change agent in that place, the extraordinary care and the extraordinary thought that must be given to how the messages are crafted and how initiatives are strategically taken, because the land is littered with preachers who were determined to speak, as John says, truth to power, who were simply thrown out of the congregations. I mean, that sometimes happens, and it is called for on occasion. But the people who can manage to build on incremental change the hearts and minds of people without being completely run out of town on a rail, requires an extraordinary talent. And so I come to Mr. Fortson here, nice white man with a law degree, with potential and position, you know, respect from the Rotary Club and whatnot. I'm sort of characterizing this without knowing him, but I read a little bit about him. I'm extremely impressed with people who have a seat at the table, but when they see that which is wrong, have the courage, I like John's word, the guts, to tell it like it is. And this is Warren Fortson. I'm happy to have you here, sir.
Thank you. First, let me say that I really thought that this was going to be a discussion about two cases that we had here in Americus while I was here. Well, actually, three cases, but two that we were going to discuss. I did not know this was going to become autobiographical. But if that's it, I'll try to be brief as I can when I can be brief. As Lena has corrected something, I need to correct something that's in print. I have seen now in a couple of releases where in one case I fled Americus because of the Ku Klux Klan. In another one, I fled Americus because of the white people. I have to correct that. First place, I didn't flee Americus. No one ever asked me to leave. No one ever told me to leave. I left because my law practice had disappeared. I had 5 children and a wife, and I had to make a living. And so I had to seek another place to go, which ultimately became Atlanta. Now, going back to how I became involved as I did, whereby about in August of 1965, I was not the most popular person in Americus. No, that is true. But I came to Americus in about 1959, and shortly thereafter, I was put on the Americus City Board of Education. Shortly thereafter, and Greg may or may not remember this, we had a lawsuit where the Board of Education was sued out of the refusing to allow the children from Koinonia to come to the school. I knew nothing about Koinonia. It's just a Greek name to me. I inquired around and heard about it being a communist refuge and all of that sort of stuff that was prevalent at that time. And I then, at some point in time, saw a reprint of the grand jury presentation of its investigation of Koinonia. So my curiosity was really up about Koinonia. But the school system was sued over the refusal to allow the children to come in, and that lawsuit wound up being heard in Macon, Georgia. I sat there and listened to the case being presented, and for the first time, I met and heard Clarence Jordan. He got on the stand, he made their case out, he told about Koinonia. Well, I knew his brother. His brother was big politician. My brother's a big politician. So I knew his brother. Very fine man. I knew of his family, very fine family. And he impressed me very much. So when I got back later, I went out to Koinonia to see Clarence. I had a most delightful lunch with he and his wife. Saw the place, saw what was going on, and of course came away with a totally different conception of Koinonia and what it was. I was very impressed and very favorably impressed with it. That was my first encounter with the prejudice of the day. Then I'm going to move up now until the first demonstration that took place in Americus. happened in the evening in an attempt to integrate, as I understand it, or understood it, the theater here. I came to work, my office was out on Main Street, and next to the filling station, if you remember, was the old Times Recorder building. And the Elks Club had been in there at one time, but it stood just empty. I walked to work that morning, and when I got to that building, it was full of little children. I couldn't understand. I went over there and I asked, what in the world, what is this that's going on? Oh, they'd had this big rumble the night before. They'd arrested all these kids. And I made inquiry about it and found that most of these were just little, the people, the children involved in the movement initially were young kids, the little ones. They weren't high school seniors. They weren't adults. And this was a building in the town that I had come to live in, chock full of little children in the broiling hot July summer. And they stayed, and they stayed, and they stayed. And I said to myself, not in my town. Not in my town. That's when I became involved in the movement. I wasn't joining any of the movement as such. But in my town, we were going to address that if I could. The Solicitor General, District Attorneys they're known as today, who brought the charges against the insurrectionists, and I'm moving up to that, appeared in my office. I was county attorney. I was they had me as city attorney. I was county attorney. Billy Smith was the city attorney. The suit had been filed to get these people out of the jail, out of the prison that they had made it. But I'm getting ahead of myself with the three. Let's put them aside for a minute. We had that hearing. Well, it was my job to defend the county aspect of their being in jail. Billy Smith was the city attorney. It was his job. The city officials involved. Billy and I met in the library to do legal research to prepare, and it was very, very clear to any halfway intelligent lawyer there was no defense to it. This was a foregone conclusion. They had the hearing, and what happened was what we knew was going to happen. We sat there, we watched them put up the case. We heard Judge Tuttle issue and his three-judge panel, or what was left of it when one walked off the bench, declare them, that you couldn't do that, and put everybody out. And Mabel Bonham signed whatever needed to be signed, and all that was over. Then we moved up to when they put all of the kids, all of you fellows into the jail up there as insurrectionists. And Celeste was in my office. He was running for Congress, and he was bragging of the fact that he'd put them in jail, and he was going about and letting them stay, because he intended to make a lot of hay out of that. And I said, you won't get my vote. I said, I disagree with you. I think what you've done is wrong, but you're the solicitor, you got to live with it. Of course, they were promptly let out of jail. But by this time, so much was going on that much discussion of what was going to be done about the turmoil that was Americus at that time. Well, Albany blew up, and you all will remember that. You will remember everything that was going on in Albany at that time. It kind of made Americus look like just a little, you know, a little sideshow, a minor sideshow to what was going on in Albany. America's businessmen had worked hard to get the industry that it had gotten here. America's businessmen didn't want to see what happened in Americas, what happened in Albany, what happened in Americas. They did not like what was going on in America. Nobody knew what to do. I was not only on the Board of Education, I was a chairman of the Carnegie Library Board. Albany had to integrate its library. So Albany was forced to integrate its library. Albany took the chairs and the tables out of the library, so when they integrated it, black folk could come in and get a book, but you couldn't sit there and read it. My library board said, we're not going to do any fool thing like that. We voted right then and there to integrate the library, to issue library cards to anybody who came in. We did that without any court order. We did that without any threat of court order. I went back to my office. I called C.B. King. I said, C.B., we just integrated the library. If you don't believe me, send somebody up there. Next thing I knew, I was going down to the library, and I looked up there, and there were some 4 or 5 black young folks getting a library card. And as far as I know, it's been integrated and operating that way ever since. One night after the school board broke up, I guess America at that time, probably the most famous doctor was Bud Roberts. Sports doctor for everybody. Everybody loved Bud Roberts. And a few of us were just kind of standing around there talking. And Bud said, you know, we got to address this whole integration issue sometime. And that's all it has said. I've been thinking about it, worrying how am I going to open my mouth. Well, here Bud Robertson's opened his mouth. So the next time we had the meeting, I said, you know, y'all weren't here, but when we broke up, Bud over there said we got to address this thing. Let's address this thing. Now, we had a big board. If I remember, it was about 13 people on it. The mayor was an ex officio member of it. Everybody in the world was represented on the board. It's a good board. It was good folks, good people. I went back. By this time, I had kind of gotten a reputation somewhere out there, because I don't know if any of y'all ever remember Frances Pauley, who was with the Southern. Well, Frances was in and out of my office all the time. And she was feeding me all this stuff that was coming out of Washington of what you could do with these wonderful urban renewals and things like that. And among the things that I had from the Commerce Department was a paper that had various desegregation plans in them for schools. Now, most of the schools at this time, they would integrate the 12th or the 11th grade. So you'd come in, spend a while, and leave. And if they forced, then it would go down, slowly down. In there was what they call the freedom of choice. It was the most radical thing out. Anybody could go in any grade they wanted to. I drafted one for the Americus school system using that form in that book. I carried it back to the board. We talked about it. I passed out copies of it for them to look. We set a meeting. We had a meeting at the courthouse that lasted until 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, I want you to mind, we were under no threat of court order. We were under no threat of a lawsuit. We were under no court order. At 2 o'clock that morning, the board voted, just before it voted, one member of that board said, I see where y'all are going. I want no part of it. I resign right now. And he got up and he walked out. The rest of that board, 100%, with the mayor, one of them, voted to adopt the freedom of choice plan for the Americus City School System. And we did. Now, the thing that jumping way ahead now, Robertina was a straight A student. Her father and I were very good friends. Robertina was one of those who went into that school. We'd say, how's that going? How's that going? Oh, it's going all right, it's all right. Well, we get a little trouble, you know, here, there, and yonder, but we're handling it, blah, blah, blah. We had a meeting here some couple of 3 years ago here in this college. We were invited down. Robertina's sister became the principal of that. Now, Robertina, if I tell any of this wrong, you jump up there and you tell me. But this is the way I remember it, all right? Well, she was the principal of that school. She invited back, had Robertina come back. Robertina, of course, has gone on to fame and fortune after that. Because Robertina was a straight A student. She was gonna do good in life, and she did. She invited that class back, and Robertina talked about her experience in that class. And she said that one of the women who was there, who had been in that class, got up and with tears in her eyes said, Robertina, I was one of those who mistreated you. I am so terribly sorry. He said it wasn't a dry eye in the room. Look at what it came to. Look at what the suffering, look at what the trial and the error came to. Now, I was all in the thick of it. I was in it because I wanted to be in it. The only thing, I lost the law practice. I was told, I was one of the teachers of the men's Bible class at my church. I was told not to come back to my church. Interestingly enough, my ancestral church in Washington, Wilkes County, where I come from, which is there, which Linda and I, every year on the first Sunday in October, go for its annual reunion. Nobody lives out there in the country anymore. But we have that, we keep the church going. It's been there, one of the oldest Methodist churches in Georgia. We keep it alive, we support it, and we have our reunion every year. I have my great-grandfather, one of the largest planters in Wilkes County, and owned a lot of slaves. My great-grandfather was a secretary in that church. He was like my daddy. He was a pack rat. He kept everything. And all the minutes of the meetings going back to before the Civil War, most of them were still extant. A lot of them been lost. I got a cousin, only one of us I know that made any money. He made a lot of money and went back home and bought his old home place and started doing family research. Well, one of the things he did was to put together in a volume all the minutes from this old church. They're fascinating to read. You know, we had lots of black members of that church back then. I don't mean slaves sitting up in the slave quarters. The last two was Henry and Millie Wynn. And Henry and Millie Wynn didn't join the church until 1866, the year after the war was over. Millie died in 1896. At the quarterly conference, there's a beautiful inscription in honor of Millie in the minutes of the book. Henry died in 1898 It's recorded as such, but the quarterly conference minutes are missing for that time, so I don't know what. But Henry, all during that time, was an exhorter in the church. I didn't know what an exhorter was in the Methodist Church. I called Emory Theological School out there and asked them, what was an exhorter? Well, it seems it was kind of a mixture of a lay preacher and somebody who just in the church got you to sing out, pray out. Well, Henry was an exhorter in the church. And every quarterly conference, he'd be tried, and it'd show that he passed. He became infirm. And one of the members of the church, according to the minutes, was appointed to look after the needs of Henry Wynn. But they still put him down as passing the test to be the exhorter. So I say, all of that had a lot of impression on me. It just did. I still think we can live together, go to church together, eat together, whatever. We can do it. We can solve this thing. We can't stop now.
This is remarkable, huh? Now, I hope that you will, the whole purpose is to incite you to engage with these remarkable people. And I hope you will now take the plunge. Who will be the first? Did you understand what I said? Sam, you're going to, or you want to have people come to that mic?
Yes, or we can simply bring the mic. But I think it would be the more expedient thing would be if people who have questions to come here and make a line.
Yes, stand
here,
in line, so we don't have to.
And then one by one, they will entertain your questions.
Now, Sam, I'm not going to allow you to ask that man's question. Is that what he's trying to get you to do?
It's okay. Yes, if you have questions, please form a line over here, and you can come. We take you one by one over here. I'd like to begin by, of course, we wanted to focus on those two central questions about the two important landmark cases that were here. And I wanted to, in particular, the three women on the panel who were part of the four women who went to jail for trying to vote in the white-only line. If you could tell the audience, how did that come about? Who made the decision to do that? I know, Mary Kate, you were a candidate. You were the first African-American candidate to qualify in the Democratic primary in Sumter County, a woman candidate. And I'm not sure who initially went into the bathroom, who were trying to vote into the white voting line. Could either of you talk about that a bit?
Yes.
And share those, what happened that day?
Yes. I guess I have to start with why I was there in the first place and why I was running for Justice of the Peace. The election was coming up, and Southwell was the Justice of the Peace. And in all minds, I'm sure I'm telling you, in all minds, Southwell just wasn't it. And we felt we needed somebody else. Now, I was asked to run for that office, but I'm sure other people had been asked before. And one of the things that was asked me was, why you? Why not a black man? Now, we have to remember that during that time, black men weren't weak. They aren't weak now. What we had to remember was that those who had jobs with people who were not African American. Those who lived in homes that were not owned by African Americans. So they were told, if you do this, you will be evicted from where you live, or you will lose your job. But this was a matter of economics. You know, you have a family. You can't do this. Well, I lived in a house of the lawyer who was my grandfather's lawyer, Lawyer Morris. And he told me, you pay your rent, you do what you want. So when I refused in the beginning, I said, you know, this is just not for me. I just don't want to do this. And they said, well, we can't get anybody else. We got to have somebody. So I prayed about it. And I said, you know what? If that's what you want me to do, I'll do it. So Ralph Allen and another one of the SNCC workers were my campaign managers. And we got qualified. And the only qualifications were I had to be 21 years old, I had to be a registered voter, and I had to live in this district. There were many people who got the word out, don't vote for her because she's not qualified. The day that we had the election, I went down to do poll watching. And it was 2 days after we buried my mother. It was good for me then because it kept my mind off other things. And you know, I was so proud to be there. I was gonna poll watch, I was gonna vote, I was a registered voter, I just was just excited. And I got to the courthouse, and I was all decked out because I'm gonna tell you something. I had just left Fort Valley as a brand new soror of Alpha Kappa Alpha. So I was there in a pink dress with green shoes, and I even had a pink hat on the side of my head. And I looked at this, when I got there, I looked at this line, and I looked at the signs, and I said, you know, I want to vote before it's too late. And there was a sign that said, white men, white women.
That's right.
And there was a little sign that went to the back and curved and said, colored.
That's right.
I said, I know I'm not colored. I don't know whether I'm a white woman. I know I'm not a white man. I know I'm a woman. I'm not going to the back. That was when I made the decision. I hadn't gone there. I hadn't planned. There was no plan. There was no plan of action. I hadn't talked to the ladies and said, okay, we're going to go down there and this is what we're going to do. That wasn't it. I was so angry then. I mean, I couldn't see straight. So I opened the door and walked in. I didn't even know they were behind me. They were there too. When I opened that door and walked in, they walked in behind me. And I went up to the desk and I said, good afternoon. The lady said, what do you want? I said, I want to vote. She said, you can't vote here. I said, why not? She said, this is for women. I said, well, the last time I looked in the mirror, I knew I was a woman.
And that's what the
So
deputy
she was extremely nervous, and at that time, she immediately sent for the sheriff. And he sent the deputy. Deputy came out and said, you need to leave. I said, why? He said, because this is for white women, it's not for color. I said, well, when you tell me what color I am, I'll leave. Well, he stood there, and he talked, and I said, are you going to deprive me of my right to vote? He said, yes. And then he looked around, he said, these are Jean Horn's elections. He told me that if Lana Turner even came on the property, to throw her in jail. I said, Lana? I don't see Lana. They didn't even know Lena's name. It was Lana Turner. So I said, well, we're not going anywhere. So then they sent for Chapel. And when he came out, he said, you have to leave. I said, well, you haven't told us why we're going to leave. She said, you're blocking the entrance to a polling place. I said, how could I be blocking the entrance when you got your hand on the knob? You're opening the door, they were opening the door, letting people in, letting people out, holding the door.
He sure was.
So Chapel came again, and so we decided to leave. I said, because I don't need to fight today. So we were arrested for blocking the entrance to a polling place, which was erroneous. We were not blocking the entrance. And we were taken over to the jail. And he called our names and said we could post bond and get out. I hadn't done anything. Why should I post bail? So he said, well, if that's the case, you'll go to jail. So be it. So we were put in jail. We stayed in jail for 10 days.
That's right.
And during that time, we sued the city of Americus. The same thing had happened in Albany, and that was the problem. Albany had this problem with voter registration and with voters and the separate entrances. And if nobody challenged that, it would have continued. So we challenged that law so that Americans would have to do what they needed to do. And during that time, when we sued Americus, we sued them in federal court because we got nothing from the paper here. We got nothing in the paper here. You know, the Times Reporter didn't do anything. So we didn't sue them in the city. We sued them in federal court. CB was the best ever. And when we had to go to court, they wouldn't let Lena and I go. They took Miss Campbell and Gloria, and they told Lena and I, we can't let you go because you will hurt the city. Okay? So the judge ruled that we had to be released the next day, and this was on the 30th of July. The next day was the 31st. They have to be released. If you don't release them by 6 o'clock, you would be fined $10,000 a day for contempt of court. And so when they came back, they said that we could go, but then they didn't want to give us a way to get home. They wanted to release you and say, okay, run out the door. Well, somebody came to get Lena, somebody came to get Mrs. Campbell and Gloria, and I was waiting for somebody to come get me. They told me to get out. I told them I wasn't going anywhere. I took my little suitcase and went on back in the cell. They called me all kinds of names. The next thing I knew, there was a cab waiting for me on the outside. And therefore, I was allowed to leave. But it was an experience. And we caused a lot of havoc while we were there. We had people singing. I mean, we would sleep. We were in juvenile cells. We were not in cells that had the little door, one little eyepiece up there. We were in juvenile cells, so it was a little walkway and some bars. And they would let me stand on the scene and holler down the transom at night, and we would wake up the prisoners. So we sleep all day and eat and talk and whatever. But at night, around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, we would holler down the transom, wake up all the prisoners, and teach them freedom songs. And we would sing from 2 o'clock in the morning until 6, and then we'd go back to sleep. So of course they didn't, then they wanted to say I was the instigator and I was telling them what to do. These were intelligent women. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. I was not anybody's mother. I couldn't tell anybody what to do. And we did not sit down and plan. We did what our hearts told us to do. We did what we knew was right.
Is there someone else?
Well, there's another part to that story. I'll only take a moment.
Please.
You know, it's interesting what you end up in life doing. And my assignment, and there were assignments, but we had to protect our candidate. And it was important that she become an AKA. So we didn't tell her everything. That was strategy. And my job then was to be the risk manager. And in managing that risk, it was to keep others from knowing. Only a few people could know everything.
That's right.
Only a very few people, and we wanted to protect Mary Kay, but we did have a plan. The plan was that we were going to be arrested, because if we weren't arrested, no change would come about, and we were going to remain. But her job was to be the candidate. We thought she was the smartest thing ever walked the streets of Americus, you know. So, but that we did plan. There was a plan, and the job was to keep you calm and quiet, and the rest of us, if you didn't go to jail, we're going to send you in anyway.
Is she just learning that today?
Yes. Today, she just learned that. That was lots of strategy, you know, behind that. Yes.
Ms. Campbell, would you like to say a word?
I'm enjoying this. And the reason why I'm saying this the way I am, saying I'm enjoying this, is because she was nice and quiet and composed. The deputy met us right at the courthouse door, like she said. Because when I got up to the door, and he told us we couldn't go in, and he nicely told us, just like she said, this was a women's line. And I told him I thought I was a woman, because I had 4 boys, and how could you have 4 boys without being a woman? I didn't say it to be funny, but I wanted to make him think of it. He wasn't so bad in his statements to us, though. He just told us what they instructed him to say. And when they took us across the street, she was calm and composed, but she didn't cooperate one bit with the way he wanted things done. And then they did something else. They were very, very proud of their jail, because at that time that jail was a new jail. And the reason why I mention is that when they sent us, when I say my companion and I, we were sent at night. It wasn't in the day, but we were sent at night to Macon. And we did not go into a new jail. We went into a dirty jail because Reverend Campbell was very surprised when I called him from Macon and told him that's where I was. Now, he and C.B. King did a marvelous job to me. I don't know about you all, do you all think so? Yeah. C.B. King was marvelous in protecting us when we went into the court in Macon. And when Judge Hooper turned us all loose, our authorities from here were there, because I remember seeing our authorities come down and told him, when he asked him, how soon can you get these people out? And he told him, right away, Judge. And that's when he turned us loose. But we did make history, because we got rid of the colored line. You hear the way I say colored. The colored line, the white women's line, and the white men's line. In other words, they had 3 places to go. And why? I was thinking, when we were all going there to do it, what we needed to do, and you, and when I say you, I'm talking about we citizens of Americus, when they signed that law, and we were allowed to go to vote, you covered the Lee Street Road going up there to register to vote. And you did a marvelous job going to vote. But now, think about it now, in the 21st century, are we going to vote like we used to? What happened? Do we have corns on our toes? Things happening now much more important to us than they happened then. And the best way you can win and get everything done is go to the polls and vote. That's all I want to say.
Because of what we did, there's no more segregated voting in America. That was it. But right now, my passion is voting. It has always been the voting. And maybe I do some things I shouldn't do sometimes, but there are times when people will come up and say, oh, I didn't like what was going on. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. The first thing I'll say is, are you a registered voter?
That's right.
If they say no,
That's right.
I would look at them and say, you don't want to talk to me. I don't want to talk to you. If you're not a registered voter, you are not authorized to complain.
That's right.
So if you're not a registered voter, go to those polls and vote. Things have been won or lost by one vote. And don't let anybody tell you that your vote does not count. You know, what we need to be doing is going into the schools and seniors, when they're 18 years old, the social studies teachers need to bring in the registrar and register those students right then. So when they leave high school, they're already registered voters.
That's right. That's what we did when we finished.
Okay, let's try to get in some more questions. Now, let me say, it has been said, if you're interested in making a comment or asking a question, come and get in line so we'll know how many people we have to accommodate.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the panel for giving me the opportunity in my life. My mother's Lena Fulton. And I remember as a child, I had glimpses of the civil rights movement. I remember standing on my uncle's shoulder singing to get my mother out of jail. And I remember the water fountains saying colored only and white only. And then we moved to New Jersey. I remember those things. But thank each of you, because each of you allowed doors for me. I was able to get my education and have opportunities. So my question is, what makes a good civil rights leader? And any one of you can answer.
But Sherrod, why don't we hear from you over there?
That's his man.
What makes a good leader?
Civil rights leader.
What makes a good leader?
All right.
Okay. I have a rebuttal, but I'll let you go.
A leader has good ears, first thing, to listen to what the people are saying. Secondly, a leader has a following. There are people he knows, or she knows, will do some action or take some steps that need to be taken. A leader in civil rights is no different from a leader in education. The first thing that a leader must do is to get the fear out of himself or herself. You can't lead nobody if you, well, I tell y'all that y'all needn't do such a thing, because you might get hurt. You might lose your job. You can't lead nobody if you're scared. Then the leader has got to be open to understand that he or she does not know everything. There are some folk that think they know everything. They got something to say about everything, you know. Some things you don't know nothing about. Try to learn things. Do research. Find out about what the real problems are. And then finally, you have to have good sense, good common sense. Some people just think they know everything. They think they can solve any problem that comes up. And those are the people who get in front, and when they turn around, ain't nobody there. Because they haven't listened good enough to the people to understand how far the people are willing to go. The people can talk. Well, they're going to do this demonstration. They're going to walk this far. They're going to go to jail. But how many have commitment to suffer? How far are you willing to go? Some people willing to come to church and listen. We got a big meeting here. Oh, we got a big meeting. But now to go on a demonstration, even to register to vote, you'd be surprised at how many folk are not registered to vote. Then they get registered to vote, but they won't vote. Commitment is just, you gotta have that ear open and that heart open for strong people. You're looking for strong people, and make folk talk in a meeting. Don't let them get out there without saying where they stand on something. And all of that brings about good leadership. Good leadership promotes good fellowship.
I have
and
something.
share the time with your friends.
I'm sorry. I'm eager to add 2 or 3 things, and Sherrod exemplifies these things. One is, and I'm adding to what he said, one is that you can't have such a big ego that you think you're more important than anybody else. After all, a leader without followers is nothing. And Sherrod exemplifies that. Another thing that he's also good at is helping people find the courage and the role that they can play in this movement. Not everyone has the same skills or interests or abilities or even the same courage. So you help people find that niche, that role that they can play well and comfortably in the movement, and maybe they'll grow in courage and find other niches that they can play. So you find a role. And perhaps the most important thing is that a leader, a good leader, an effective leader, gives credit where credit is due. Because the followers, as I said, Superman can't do it all by himself. There were thousands of ordinary people, if there is such a thing, who marched and carried picket signs and risked everything. So the leader gives credit where credit is due.
Now, let me say, if you're thinking we can answer all the questions fully on this afternoon, where's our psychiatrist? Okay, so we're just hitting it a little bit, right? Have you been pleased with what you've heard so far? Yes. All right, let's hear from that gentleman behind you then. And don't ask what is a good leader, okay?
No, what I want to know is the role of the church, both within the black community and the white community during these tumultuous years, the divisions within those communities, because I know any good leader also has folks that are standing behind him with a knife. And a lot of good preachers face that in their congregations. So I want to know whether it was Mr. Fortson being asked not to come back to his church, what divisions were there? I hear there were movements in some white churches to bar blacks from entering. How did that work out here in Americus?
Warren, you want to speak to that, or?
John, go ahead.
Oh, okay, John is going to tell us the story, and Ms. Campbell is really interesting to tell us how everybody in the AME church was down with the movement, right? Okay.
One Sunday morning, Lena Turner, this Lena Turner here, and I decided to dress up for church and go to the First United Methodist Church in Americus. And we arrived all dressed up nice, and I had a suit, she had a suit on. We were ready for church. And we knew we probably wouldn't be greeted with open arms, but we thought it was important to be there. And it took those Methodists a while to decide to kick us out, which they did. So while we were waiting on their decision, we had a chance to hear the sermon, which is what was going on when we entered the church. And the sermon, basically, my take on the sermon was, we're all good people. Of course, his audience was all white except for Lena. And what we need to do is to prevent ourselves from being contaminated by what? Communists, race agitators, those people back there that are sitting there and about to get kicked out. So that was my taste of the white church, that white church on that Sunday. After we were removed like furniture, evicted from the good white church, we decided, well, we're all dressed for church, let's go to one of the black churches. So we went to Friendship. And we heard about how we are all sinners. We need to repent. We can't take things for granted. So that's just a little capsule story that, for me, illustrated something about the churches on both sides of town.
Interesting. Please. Yes, please.
Now, I'm asked to make an opinion, and I want you to listen closely. I'm saying this. Now, I may not be right, but I want you to follow me. The Apostle Paul said, let every man be persuaded by his own opinion. That's the first thing I want you to remember. Now, over there at Lee Street Methodist Church, in the opinion of the minister, which is the head of the church because it's a Methodist church, and the pastor is the chairman of the boards, all boards. In his opinion, he spoke what he had to say. He dressed it up in the manner and with whatever God gave him to say, to speak to those. And as you say, he was thinking everybody was contaminated. Well, maybe they were contaminated in his mind, because maybe he didn't understand the teachings of Jesus Christ in the way that God meant for him to answer in the 20th century going into the 21st century. But we must understand this. we are to give an account for everything that we do when we stand before Christ. Now, someone say, oh, there she go talking about religion. But it is the truth. Think about it. And number two, the church in the civil rights movement had played a very important part in our leadership, in our safety. The church, under Martin Luther King, gave us some very, very concrete ideas. I'm talking about for us as people of color. Somebody don't want to say color. We are people of color because we are very colored. You can look among us here sitting on the platform and see we are very different colors. Now, when we remember Martin Luther King said that we would go with nonviolence. Jesus advocated nonviolence. Now, who else do you know would advocate violence? I know it's not fair to make you think about what I'm saying, but I want you to think. Who advocates violence? Your friend Lucifer, who's going to and fro among here in Americus, in Georgia, seeking whom he can devour. Oh, there you go talking the Bible again. That's the only way I can defend that statement about the church. The church is taking the leadership in us to get the things that have been promised to us. So I advocate that we follow the leadership as what the church is offered. I'm not talking about the church as a collective body, but as the leadership of Jesus Christ told us to do. That's the important thing. And then I think we can make a wise decision because I think it will be handed to us that way.
But let me just say, please, especially if there's some folk here who are under a certain age, I think it's important, and Mary Kate just kept saying this, she wasn't looking for trouble. No. And I think that's generally, sometimes people are looking for a good trouble, but a lot of this is the result of, Fannie Lou Hamer says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yeah, so I discovered at Haley Farm a few years ago when Marion brought some high school some college seniors and recent graduates to talk about the movement. And after about 2 days, 3 days, Prathia was there, a handful of other people that we would know. They were talking about the movement. And this kid from Berkeley jumped up and he was angry. He said, look, I've been here 2 or 3 days trying to understand this movement thing. And I want to know, where was the meeting? Where was the convention where you all got together and figured out that you're going to have a movement? And by the way, that was a breakthrough because the veterans implicitly understood there was no such thing, but young folk were thinking about this great homogeneous movement. Please, it wasn't like that. Basically, we heard the people were doing something in the town over here. So, when the kids in North Carolina sat in the lunch counter, the news gave us certain ideas, if you remember. Okay, now, I'm saying this because I use this word homogeneous. There were black people and white people who were committed to the struggle right here. And there were black people and white people running in the other direction.
That's right.
Let me tell you, don't you ever have this idea in your mind that black churches were uniformly aligned with the progressive forces for change. It's just not true.
That's right.
And even in churches that were recalcitrant and negative, there were positive people within those churches. I dare say that was also true in the Methodist Church. But people sitting there when John and Lena were expelled didn't have the guts or the freedom and don't judge them. Don't judge them. Like I say, when you got a mortgage, you have to make some kinds of choices. Warren, am I making any sense over here? Right. He has 5 children. He's got to support his family. Right. Look, the people in that church who were of good mind and proper spirit had some other things to consider. The letter from a Birmingham jail talks about the progressive white Christians who remain silent.
That's right.
But let me say, J.H. Jackson of the National Baptist Convention virtually hated Martin Luther King. Both Baptists, both black. So we just need to know that, I mean, Anne Braden was a white working class woman from Louisville, Kentucky. All across the South, you had white people who were willing to take a stand and who suffered a lot for it. And then you had black people who couldn't wait to go tell the boss man what was going on. So if you're looking for clarity and consistency and uniformity, you just aren't going to have it in the movement or anywhere human beings are gathered. Let the church say amen. Amen. That's right. You got families with right-wing Republicans and left-wing Democrats.
That's right.
And they all suck from the same breast. Pardon me for that expression. This is the nature of human life. We're diverse. And the movement was, in fact, that. Come on, who's next?
Let me give you some
Please.
examples of that. At the height of my unpopularity, I would leave my office and walk down the sidewalk, and I would see people look up, see me coming and dart in a store across the street. They didn't want to come. I'd get back to my office and the phone would ring. And somebody would say, "Warren, I know you saw me. I know you know I love you, honey." He said, "I'm all for you and what you're doing, but I just can't afford to be seen with you." I was on my way to Atlanta. A woman of much eminence, whom I greatly loved and respect, who depended very much on a continued popularity, was coming in the opposite direction. It was just happened to be at a slow place where she recognized my car, I recognized hers. We waved, both pulled to the side, backed up, and I went over there and we sat and talked about what was going on. Very sympathetic to what we would all call progressive, all that. As I left, she said, "Warren, be sure and don't tell anybody you saw me."
Good afternoon. My name is Geneva Dudley. I was a part of the movement. I don't have a question for the panel, but I have a story to tell also.
Yes.
I was in the movement, and my part was we went downtown to the theater. That night, we went to the front. We knew we couldn't get a ticket because our place, again, was going to the back door, but we stood there. And the reception told us, she said, "You guys got to go." We said, "We are not going anyplace." On that same night, a lot of us was arrested because she pointed toward the jailhouse. She said the law would be coming, but it would be coming from that direction. So that night, we was arrested, we was locked up, we was released, but the next day we went back again. We was arrested again, and that time, I stayed in jail for over 30 days. 30 long days. But I can tell you, something good came out of that, because every day they fed us hamburgers in the morning, hamburgers in the evening, and all the water you could drink. And I promised the Lord, if I ever get out of jail, I wouldn't eat a hamburger again. But it was worth it. You know, I was young then, a lot of my colleagues from school was there, and it was just worth it. And I just want to say to Lena and Mary Kay, you all guys know me, and you know, it was a good thing. I think we still have a long ways to go, though.
Yeah.
My name is Ollie Evans Simmons Zion. I was born and raised here, right here in Americus. I know Mary Kate because her mother worked with me at Big Bethel Baptist Church. My question today, and I know a couple of more people that is sitting on the podium. My question today is, with all of the things that was put into the Civil Rights Act in the 60s that have been rolled back, all of the recent things that we have seen happen to the black race that is so heartbreaking and so discouraging for us. And I have heard that you said on the podium that we have to be encouraged, we have to have the strength and the dedication to move on, to make decisions, to be courageous. Do not be fearful of making a stand. Some of us have to make that stand every day. And I appreciate your telling that, the moderator, for saying how we have to have the courage and the strength. Because all of the things that's happening to us right now, and it's national news, it's daily news, it's still put under the cover locally, so people really won't know what is going on. But I pray constantly that we will have the courage and the commitment to stand up individually. A lot of what we have to fight is going to happen to us individually. But if you make a stand individually, you can make a stand as a group. I don't know how some of you started out, whether you had the idea that this is wrong, I want to do something about it, and to speak out. Because like they say, a lot of times we are afraid. I have never been afraid. Growing right up here in Americus, Georgia, I had to make a stand at one time, even in a school, because I had polio. And prejudice is not only out with white people, it can be right in your school with your teachers when they feel like somebody is more deserving, and you come from the place where I come from, which was called Pooh's Alley. And I was voted for treasurer of my class. And they said that my mother did day work. She couldn't, if I spent the money, she couldn't afford to put it back. But at one time, my teacher had to admit that you don't judge people by who their family comes from, but by the character of that family. And we were honest people. So I just want to say that we have to look at all of the things that's happening to us right now and have the courage to teach our children and to be ourselves of good character.
Thank you very much. Just a minute before you speak.
I think that the regression, things that are going back, has come about because we took an intermission in the struggle. I think it's time, once again, to choose conflict. We've had an intermission, it's over. Without conflict, the struggle becomes stagnant. So get registered. Make sure your children are informed, your neighbor, your cousin. Don't get comfortable with Miss Obama being there. It's strategy to keep us in our place. Thank you.
Let me just say, if you want, who was that, Frederick Douglass? I think he says it well. And I think our definition of freedom, Lena, was flawed. And to some extent, we still suffer from that limited understanding of what freedom is. And I think that accounts for the intermission, sadly. But we see some dramatic things happening now, don't we?
Yes.
To remind us that life is about eternal vigilance. There's no place called freedom. Yeah, hello. You know, it's a constant struggle. And let me say, without struggle, life has no meaning. Come on.
I just want to thank each of you for coming. This has been a very wonderful day. Thank you, Dr. Blanchard, for hosting this and assisting with this effort. And I want to give a shout out to Sam. It's been a pleasure dreaming about this with you, and I sure appreciate that. And I want to point out Bren Dubé is sitting here in the audience, the director of Koinonia Farm. Anyways, make sure you say hello to her. In the Koinonia, I used to work with Millard Fuller before he passed away, and I still work at the Fuller Center for Housing. And I was with Millard when we read your letters that were given to you, Greg, and I remember those tears and that emotion of, and I just can't imagine what you went to your mailbox and what that was like to receive those. And I worked with Faith Fuller a good bit, and some of you know the film The Briars in the Cotton Patch. It's a good film. I recommend it. There were, and there remains, a lot of briars in the cotton patch. But I think of hope in the cotton patch when I think of the letters that were sent to Greg and how he responded. And my question is, briefly, what other signs of hope in the cotton patch do each of you see?
I saw it in North Carolina just a few days ago. A group of young people of every conceivable race and color with some duct tape over their mouths, signaling that North Carolina was trying to shut them up. That's a seed of hope for me. I'm going to ask each of the panelists respond to your questions, say whatever they want, but in summation, because we are running out of time, and I'm going to start with Mary Kate, and we're going to go right along in the order that we followed at the opening.
Well, what I see is that people are getting excited again. There are persons out there that's ready to get started and start this thing up again. However, we can't do it the same way. We have to have some planning. And I'm a person, you don't do anything without planning.
That's right.
You have to sit down and wonder, where am I going? Why am I doing this? What am I looking for? What are some results? You've got to have some planning, so you can't do anything haphazard. Then I was thinking, Lena was talking about how we were sitting back. My term was complacency. We've gotten complacent, and the other term is, we think we have arrived. Oh, I haven't arrived. We haven't arrived anywhere. We need to keep going. The other thing I want to say is that there were things that was happening in Americus that I know that people didn't know why they were happening. And I'm referring to jobs that were gotten by African Americans at Manhattan Shirt Factory. Nobody knew how that came about. People, all of a sudden, black people were just getting jobs at Manhattan. Well, I want you to know there were 3 black people that went and took that test to get a job at Manhattan, and 2 of them made it. One of them was Donnie McDonald, and the other one was me. In 1966, Johnny Mae Black, Donnie McDonald, and me went to take that test. We took the test, and it was rumored later that we made higher on that test than anybody had ever been there. They sent us out to the shirt factory, gave us a sewing test. Johnny Mae's machine malfunctioned, and they said she had failed the test. Well, see, my take on that was they hired Donnie and me, but I told Donnie I felt that you didn't want too many blacks out there at the same time. So we were the only 2 there except the janitor and the maid, and we were told not to talk to them. But there were some experiences there that were out of sight. And I must tell you that when black people started going there, the work increased. We were told that they were better than anybody else, and all our lives we've sold. So it wasn't a bad thing. Many of them became supervisors and just everything, and it was a good thing. That was the time I decided that I knew that, that was not what I needed. Everybody knows what we can do in life. And working with my hands was not it. That was a wake-up call for me to do something else. So I was desperate to go to college. And that's why I went eventually and got into Georgia Southwestern College. I did 2 years and a year and a half, graduated in '69. Perlette Brooks and I were the first 2 blacks to graduate from Georgia Southwestern, but that's because we transferred in as juniors. There were other black students here who went the distance, from freshmen to seniors. But we were proud that we were there to just pave the way.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. Lena?
Dr. King said he might not get to the promised land with us, but keep on marching. Please remember that all progress was a coalition of action. I'll close by quoting Reverend Wallace Charles Smith of Shiloh Baptist sermon titled, "Looking Back in Gratitude, Looking Forward in Hope." I have been extremely blessed. I'm extremely thankful that the movement continues to exist.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mamie?
Catch me into it. My friends, I'd like to say this. We have all been here all along. When Reverend Campbell was sent out on the other part of the district, I went with him, and his always prayer was to come back to Americus, and he wanted to be buried here, and he was. He's still out there in Staley, as far as I know now. The reason why I'm saying that is for this reason. I'm still here in Americus. I still see some things we need to do to improve everything. We still need to talk to our boys and girls and our young men and young women to be able to wake up. What am I talking about, wake up? Some of them still think we're sleeping. What I mean to say is this. We still got to remind him that, just like Lena said just now, we are still moving on, and we're still trying to get to the promised land. And the way we need to do that, and to do it just like Martin Luther King said we're going to do, collectively we have to stick together. It's not one church against the other and what one church is saying, because all of the churches are saying basically the same thing, even though they're coached in different languages. But the thing what I am interested in, what I want us to see us to do, is 2 things. Work together scholastically, send our children to school as far as we can, and we got a break now. With the president we have, he's opened the way for us to send the children to school after they leave high school. But make sure they stay in here in the high school until they finish high school. Make sure that we tell them what we know about what has happened and how we are working to make the dream that Martin Luther King said become a reality. And please, don't wait till we have to go back to vote again and then we stay home. Please, please, if they say it's a tie and you got to break the tie, will you please go and vote? Please do so. Because you know the idea is, we'll make it a tie, because you know they're not going to come back. So it's time for us to shock everybody by sticking together and going back downtown and vote so that we can get the things that we need to get for our benefit there. Thank you.
Who's next? Do you remember? I think it's Greg. Yeah, Greg. You have a closing word?
Closing words. Well, the thing, this may sound simplistic, but one of the things I notice in society today is you can go places and you'll see interracial couples, and nobody seems to care. Back when I was young, that was one of the most volatile things you could see. And I think that eventually we're all going to have to just consider ourselves tan. And we're all one family. And that's what Koinonia was all about. And that's what the Klan feared, because that's what they thought was terrible and what I think is wonderful. So that's the difference, I think. Treating people as another soul I think we're all one soul eventually. So we have to realize it. Thank you.
Okay. Charles?
I'm 76 years old. And every day I fight for freedom. There's been no pause. I see hope in our children, but I see hope because we are fighting in, for example, in Baker County, where we are trying to take back the school system that's been taken away from us. We are fighting in Newton, Georgia, to wrest away from the Tea Party the control that they have over the school system there. I have hope because we're fighting. If I weren't doing anything at all, I'd be depressed. I feel bad about myself. I feel bad about my people. I feel bad about our community. But it's because I keep myself active. When I see something that needs to be done, I do it. And not hold my hands up and cry. We won a suit in the federal courts on our land project. We got hope because we used the money to buy more land. Remember one time we had 6,000 acres of land in Lee County, but we lost it because the opposition, basically white folk, got to say it, stole from us, burned our ground, stole hogs, and other reasons why we lost our land. But we won a lawsuit in federal court and bought some more, 1,846 acres of land in Dougherty County. And so I have hope. The Lord will bless you if you keep working. Get a little project, register somebody to vote, help some elderly person to get the food stamps. Any little project can be helpful. Everybody working together. Thank you.
Wow. Come on, John.
A lot of ways to answer the question about hope. I'll take a few. One is that there's a lot of interest in increasing work on sustainable agriculture, growing food, selling it locally, growing it without chemicals, in reinventing agriculture, in effect going back about 100 years. Another sign of hope in my eyes is the fact that there is more money invested in Texas in wind power, wind farms, than in oil exploration. Wind is becoming a significant force, playing a significant role in our nation's energy diet, if you will, and it will continue to. It's clean and so forth. Another ray of hope is that thousands of people are demonstrating against the proposed Keystone XL pipeline. Another ray of hope is that a coal company recently decided that it just wasn't going to be economic anymore to bid on getting leases in on federal land to mine it for coal. It just wasn't economic. It's getting less economic to have dirty coal as part of our energy diet. Those are some of the very many ways that I see hope. Thank you.
Warren?
Well, as Linda will remind me, I always manage to say something that I perhaps shouldn't say. But I will hope that, well, let me start this off. You're 76, I'm 85, and I'm still practicing law. My wife, Linda, and I over there, we practice out of the office that's in my home. I've been doing it for 26 years now. We represent nothing but teachers, principals, and educators. That's all our practice is. After I left here, after I wound up in Atlanta through some happenstance, I wound up representing the Atlanta Board of Education for 22 years. I inherited the Atlanta desegregation case that had been going on for 14 years. Within 2 years after I began representing them, we resolved that case in what became known famously as the Atlanta Compromise Plan. That plan brought in the first black superintendent the Atlanta system had ever had, Dr. Alonzo Crim. Dr. Crim and I became personal good friends. He's one of the finest people I ever knew. He was the best superintendent that Atlanta had had before or since. Since that time, we, in addition to bringing in the first black superintendent, we integrated every administrative position in the school system that did not have a black administrator with a black administrator. We only had 2 or 3 black administrators at that time. That meant that the school system had a black administrator and a white administrator for every position in it. What happened? Attrition from then on out. The first one that dropped out, that was the administrator, the one that was left. The teaching staff, we reached that compromise that satisfied everybody. Now, I want to remind us all of this began as black and white together. We must not forget that. If we want to just substitute black supremacy for white supremacy, we haven't gone anywhere. If we can't learn to live together, we have failed. Where I see it breaking down in large cities, it's the black blames the white blames the black. It's both of them's fault, because we have got to learn to live together. The Atlanta school system since 1972 has had a black superintendent. Every time a superintendent is needed, a nationwide search is made to find another superintendent. It is understood a white person need not apply. You go into the Fulton County Courthouse and you strain to see a white face. This is unpopular to say. Linda's going to give me sheer hell for having said it. But I always manage to say something wrong before I get through talking. That's what got me in trouble down here. But I urge us all, it ain't hard to have black friends. It ain't hard for y'all to have white friends. It ain't hard to work together. I work with some of the most. When we brought in the new administrators, Atlanta school system had more black PhDs in its schools, more PhDs, black and white, than any other school system in the nation. Why? Because the black PhDs until then couldn't get a job anywhere else. So when we got the cream of the crop, some of the brightest folks I ever was around. They don't come like that in it anymore because the jobs are wide open. But it was a wonderful time. We all worked together. We had loved together. It was great. We got to bring it all back that way. Black and white together. Thank you.
I'm going to, Sam, after this remarkable experience, which is being recorded, I'm going to turn the program over to you if I can have one word about the future.
Yes.
I'm a moderator, but I would like to have a word, if I may.
Of course, thank you.
All right. Is that all right with you? So look, I'd like to give a little resource. How many of you have seen the film Park Avenue about money, power in America? How many of you seen that? PBS film, you seen that? 3 people, 4 people. Go watch that film. Way back in Montgomery, Dr. King says, our goal is not to destroy simply the institution of segregation, but in his words, it is to end, our goal is redemption, it is reconciliation, and we all remember the beloved community. Now let me tell you, a beloved community must have an economic floor, a structural economic floor that makes it possible to have a beloved community. And the one thing you get from this PBS film is that the richest 400 Americans own more than the next 100 million Americans. You will not have a just society with wealth so unequally distributed. I'm not here today to tell you how to find a balance, but I'm telling you, the beloved community will evade us for as long as this inequity exists. That's true. So now, if hope comes from work, you're going to be the most hopeful people I can imagine, because we've got some serious work to do. God bless you, and thank you for being here.
I want to, of course, thank our panelists. You've been extraordinarily candid, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, your week, to come and join us for this eloquent expose, and we really appreciate it. A couple of things I want to say. I think Warren has been a bit too modest here this evening. I want to read something that was written by a reporter, Nicholas Van Hoffman. I'm sure you remember. I want to read what he said when Warren left with his family. He said, there was a petition circulating around Americus with 1,000 signatures on it asking that Warren Fortson be removed or dismissed as county attorney. His friends have put together a counter petition, but it only has about 200 names on it. Since his troubles began, his wife had been receiving angry calls, and now the situation has reached the point that the Fortsons have sent 4 of their 5 children out of the city for safety. And when the sun goes down, they don't sit by the windows when the lights out in the room, when the lights are on in the room. I had to keep the baby with me, his wife said, but the town is like Nazi Germany, and I really don't know if we should stay. I want to read another letter that came from the 4 women who were incarcerated in the Sumter County Jail. And they've mentioned the 4th woman who is now deceased, Gloria Wise, Sister Soldier, no longer with us, but she is here in spirit. Now, I don't know how you got this letter out of the jail, but you have to tell us that. Gloria Ann Wise, all right. When they were incarcerated, the City of Americus, the Merchants Association, the All-White Merchants Association, fearing that there would be more violence in the streets, more demonstrations, decided that they were going to post bail for these women to get them out of jail so that we would be quiet. Well, they courageously denied that. They said, we're not going to go out of jail. We want to be released unconditionally. We didn't do anything wrong. You're going to release us on our own conditions. It's a letter they wrote from jail. Letter from the Sumter County Jail, July 24th, 1965. We have rejected the offer of the White Businessmen's Association of Americus, Georgia, to serve as our bondsmen and remain in jail. We made this decision not out of a feeling of hostility towards our would-be bondsmen, but rather out of a sense of the need to be true to self and the rest of our community. To our minds, bondsmen and persecutors are not the equivalents of good men and bad men, for in this instance, we feel that bondsman and persecutor are one and the same person. Our would-be bondsmen are the same men who, in the summer of 1963, participated in brutalizing the heads and bodies of our black brothers and sisters. The fact that they might not have physically thrust the cattle prod that burned black flesh or swung the pick handle that crushed black skulls rings hollow in the face of their then existing responsibility to speak out, and to speak out loudly. These are the same men whose failure to speak honestly has brought us to this place. So in honesty to ourselves and our unwillingness to give refuge to the guilty consciousness of men who pretend charity, we remain in jail. Signed, Mary Kate Bell, Mamie Pleasant Campbell, Gloria Ann Wise, and Lena Turner. Again, I want to thank everybody for your participation. You've been gracious in sharing your time with us. I want to remind you that we have an exhibition that's ongoing at the Public Library on Lamar Street. It chronicles newsletters and newspapers and things that chronicles the movement. If you get a chance to go by there, it's on Lamar Street. I believe the address is 805, something like that. We also have an exhibition in the library on campus here of Winford Rembert, the artist you heard and spoke with last night. They will be on the library display for another week, I believe, till September 9th, I believe. We also have a permanent display inside the Welcome Center on Forsyth Street, on Lamar Street, next to the Windsor Hotel. You may all remember that in 1963, when the Americus for John Perdue's trial was held, it was actually held inside that building, I believe the second floor. It was a federal courthouse then on the second floor. It is now where the Welcome Center is for Americus. If you go inside there, we have a display there, the timeline of the Americus movement. There's a monitor there where you can, there's a screen that comes on. You can hear some of the oral histories of the people, their testimonies as to what happened. That will be on display there as well. I urge you to go by and take a look at that. It's an effort to eventually try and establish the Civil Rights Museum here to house all the documents that we've been collecting since 2007 on the Americus movement. The other thing is that there's a banquet tonight which is being held at the Americus High School. We returned to Americus High School where 4 African-American students courageously integrated back in 1964. Including Robertina Freeman, David Bell, Gladobbs Wiggins, and Minnie Wise, Minnie Drew Wise. We return to that scene tonight. And we hope that that starts at 7 o'clock. There are tickets that are still available, and we certainly hope that you can join us there as well. I want to thank all of you for coming out again, and we appreciate it. We look forward to hosting more events like this, because we don't simply want to come here and throw a party every other year and go home. This is about action. This is about becoming involved again, as everybody's made testament tonight. There's a lot we have to do in terms of to stem this tide of turning the clock back. We can't continue to slip into this mode of complacency. We have to become activists again, one and all. And so that's the mantra that we have to take up at this time. Dr. Howard, I appreciate you. You've been you've been so wonderful with your time sharing. You were here in 2011, and you have added so much to this discussion. We appreciate it, and I would like for everyone to give him a big round of applause. To Dr. Blanchard and your staff, we certainly appreciate you extending your welcome, warm welcome to all of us here. This has been tremendous. We hope to have further partnerships with you, the university here. We think there's a tremendous opportunity for both of us to share information and see how we can move forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Sam, I mean, look, I don't know if it's there yet. I haven't been by. But when I was here, when you graciously hosted me in 2011, I went on Cotton Avenue. And the whole memory of black entrepreneurship and so on, gone. Can we at least have a historical marker telling us what was there? Hello?
Yes.
You live here, right? Can we get one of those? Somebody doesn't even know what I'm talking about. So the point is, McCoy Hill is now just a field. Americus, Georgia, had the first, Warren, tell me if I'm right now, I'm my historian, the first public black school system in the state of Georgia. McCoy Hill figures very prominently in this, but now it's sort of a rundown public space. No indication whatsoever of what was there. That sign in front of the so-called colored hospital is what I have in mind. We need more highly visible signs, at least marking the historical places where things happen, so that at least our young people will have, of all races, some idea of what transpired. Americus Institute, if we ever get this museum thing down, I got a book. I don't know how many other people may have the published history of Americus Institute, but I have it in my library as a gift from Lenora Purdy. And I know that my New Jersey-born kids won't have the same level of interest that I do in this little book, so I'm interested in a repository where scholars in the future will have an interest and will be able to study Americus Institute, the forerunner of A.S. Staley High School, where the classics were taught. Homer was taught in the original language. They taught physics and engineering in the little colored school. And by the way, while there were Northerners who supported the Americus Institute, it was the project of a local regional Black Baptist association. Okay, I'll be quiet.
I want to also give a shout out to the Zetas of Georgia Southwestern State University, who were the hostesses for this event. Give them a hand. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.